Hi YouTube, Philip here again, and this is my second video. It's a timeline again, but it's of consoles, of course, but this time it's of Sega. First up is the SG-1000. It was a cartridge-based console for 2 players, and the controller had 1 analog stick and 2 buttons on the side. Apparently, it was released as the same day as Nintendo released the Famicom. Next came the SC-3000, released in the same year but later, which was basically a computer keyboard version, which was connected to the TV, which played the same games as the SG-1000, and it had a keyboard as other controls for other games. Now the SG-3000H was almost the same thing, just that the keyboard, the keys were higher from the keyboard. Sorry. Then came the sequel from the SG-1000, the SG-1002, which was which had the cartridges which had the same pins. I mean, they looked the same, just that it had more games, and it was again for 2 players. But the controller was a D-pad and 2 buttons. Now the Sega Mark III was the third version of it, which again used the same kind of cartridges but more games, and the controller was almost exactly the same as the SG-1002, just that it looked a bit different. Then came the Master System, which was pretty cool since it had actually ran on 2 things. Most of the games, almost all of them ran on cartridges, but 10 of them ran on Sega cards, which were pretty rare. And the controller had a D-pad and 2 buttons. Apparently the button one also used the start button. Apparently it also had a light gun, known as the light phaser. Then came Sega's first 16-bit console, the Genesis. The controller was a D-pad with 1 start button and 3 buttons. And man, the console was huge. It had volume for stereo, it had even a headphone jack and everything. Now the Genesis power base converter was an add-on for it, where you put Master System games in it, and you could play them on your Genesis, and it had the cartridge slot and the card input. Now then came the sequel from the Master System 2, obviously, which had the same kind of controller, but the thing was smaller, and the cartridge slot was actually, you had to lift the label up and put the cartridge in. The Master System 3 Compact was exactly the same thing, but it was smaller and more compact, and it has a Sonic the Hedgehog on it. Next came Sega's first portable system, the Game Gear. Apparently, it was their first one, which had very good graphic games, and it had 2 buttons. And well, that's all there is. Then came their first CD-based games on the Sega CD, which was an add-on for the Genesis. I also forgot to mention, the Genesis also had a light gun called the Menacer, and also had some kind of ring they put on the floor called the Activator. Sorry, I forgot. So you basically just put the CD in, and then you just put the thing, close the CD slot. Sorry. But the thing is, once you connected them together, it was very hard to get to take them apart and put them back on again. Then came the Terra Drive, which was their first computer kind of console. So it was basically kind of like a computer. It had a keyboard, but it also had the controller from the Genesis, which you connected to it, and it had a cartridge slot for its own kind of games. Then came the Wonder Mega, which had the Genesis controller, but it was pretty large, like in dimension, and it was their first console with integrated CD into the console. It wasn't in an add-on for it. And when you And when you turned it on, it was pretty cool how it had these lines in the shape of a circle around the CD drive. Next came the Pika, which I don't know much about because it's for 5-year-olds, and it was basically well, I don't know about it. I said. But then came the Amstrad Mega PC. It was a bit like the Terra Drive, just had other games and on a different kind of cartridge, and it had its own controller, and it was white. Then came the Mega Jet. Now some people think this is a handheld console. Wrong. It had a wire that you connected it to your TV because it doesn't have a screen on it, so it's home console, and you had to have your own games plugged into the Mega Jet like that, like on your top. And originally was for Japanese airlines. That's where we found them. You just buy cartridges, and whenever you flew with Japanese airlines, you got the chance to use them. But it was only released in Japan. But you can get this nowadays on eBay for quite a good deal. Then came the Genesis 2, which was the second model, which is quite more smaller, had the same controller, and that it had the same kind of games. Sorry, that's all there is about it, just smaller and more compact. Then came the Sega CD 2, which was the CD add-on for the Genesis 2, which you played other CD-based games on it. Then came the 32X, which was basically 32-bit support for the Genesis 2, which basically apparently had its own library of games, which came on cartridges that you put on top. But there was also Sega CD 32X games, which had to have the 32X, but the Sega CD 32X games were 32-bit, and you had to have also the Sega CD. Then came the Multi-Mega, their second console, which had integrated CD. Apparently it was also called the CDX, and it had the same control as the Genesis. And well, that's all I know about it. Then came the Master System Super Compact, which was actually kind of really cool. So you held this on your lap, and the thing had an antenna, and it had another antenna that you connected it to your TV, and you just sat on the couch with this on your lap and as this controller, and you looked at the TV. Then came the Neptune, which was a console which was supposed to play 32X games, just they didn't need the whole big thing, the Genesis 2, the Sega, the CD2, and the 32X. You just had this small console. But apparently it was cancelled. Only prototypes were sold. Then came the Saturn, which had really good games and was really good, but it wasn't really that good because it was overshadowed by the PlayStation when Sony released it. The controller has one D-pad, one start button, and 6 other buttons. Then came the Iowa Mega CD, which was a console that looked a lot like a radio. It even had a radio mode, but when you set it to the console mode, you connected this to your TV, and when you lifted the CD port up, and you had the Iowa Mega CD games, and you put it in there, and you closed it, and bam, you had it. You had to connect the controller looked a lot like the Genesis controller, just that it was blue. And you had to connect it on the small port on the side. It was for 2 players. The Master System Girl is exactly the same thing as the Master System Super Compact, just that it's pink and it says girl instead of Super Compact. Then came the Nomad, which was a handheld system that played Genesis games, which apparently had a lot of success since it was, well, actually I don't know. Sorry. Then came the Genesis 3, which again played Genesis games, but this time it was even smaller. And the only 2 ports it had on the back was AV output and power. And obviously it was the same controller, and when the power switch only had a sticker to tell you it was on. But it was pretty, well, light and carryable around. It was pretty good. Then came their their best console yet, the Dreamcast, which had had a 4-player slot. You didn't need any accessories, and it had CD also integrated, so it was twice the good things. The controller, though the wire for the controller, instead of coming out the top, it came out up the bottom, because on the top you had a Dreamcast VMU slot, which usually when you played the Dreamcast it was there inside, and you could use the screen to like make moves, to do your next move, but without your other players seeing it on the screen, but just there, and then do it. But you could also take it. Wait, I'll explain the rest of the Dreamcast VMU in the next slide. Now, Dreamcast VMU, apparently, when you took it out, you could just take it out for whenever you wanted to go on the go, and you could just play it in your hand, because it has its own D-pad and A and B. And when you wanted to when you came back home, you just synchronized the progress you did with your Dreamcast by just slotting it in. Oh, and I forgot to say again, the Dreamcast apparently had also a light gun called the Dream Blaster, and it had its own keyboard for games like Typing of the Deaf. And apparently the console was also the first one with internet Then came the advanced Picobina, which was basically Pico again, but just that it was more advanced, had other games. Again, 5-year-old thing. I don't know much about it. Then in 2009 came a handheld system called the Vision, which apparently it wasn't only for games, it had other features on it too, but you could have the games that were already on it though. Then came the same year later came the Genesis FireCore, which was kind of a disappointment, because again it was they took it the 4-player thing and made it for 2 players, and it had 15 games already on it, but the other one you had to get them on cartridges and put them in. Now the controller was, well, kind of dull because it was completely black, but it had a D-pad, a start button, and 6 other buttons. Then came the Kamega, which was a handheld system, which apparently wasn't only for gameplay. You can get games for it like on something. You had to play the games that were already on it. And apparently it had the A, B, C, D buttons and a D-pad. Now sooner or later, now the Dreamcast 2 will come out in 2014 as for the 8th generation of consoles. Good luck, Sega, and I hope you good luck. So that was my second video, people. Okay, rate, comment, subscribe, Goodbye, see you next time.